How do you pitch your comic to potential buyers at a comic convention? Stay tuned to find out. Greetings everyone, welcome to the underground lair where we bring our creations to life. I'm Scott with Serkworks Art Labs. I'm a professional illustrator, designer, and mad creator. And one of the things I'm really passionate about is creating comics. Now, if you create comics, one of the things that you're going to have to inevitably do is promote that comic. So whether you're pitching your idea to a publisher, or if you're like me and you self-publish, you're going to pitch that directly to a consumer. One of the best places to do that is at a comic convention. And comic conventions are coming back, so I thought it'd be a good time to just go over some tips and some advice for giving a pitch at a comic convention. Now, there are many different pitches for different types of scenarios. For instance, if you are pitching to a publisher or say like an entertainment company or something like that, where you're actually doing like a pitch meeting, you're in a meeting, you're actually giving your ideas to some potential buyer, somebody that's going to invest in probably the concept as a whole, not just a single issue that you're trying to sell. It's a little different. The type of pitch you're going to do is a little different. For that, you're probably going to have like a pitch Bible with you, maybe some visual aids or something, and you're going to have a captive audience. You are there for a purpose. They're expecting for you to pitch that, so they're going to want to go a little more in depth. Now, typically when you do a pitch, the main thing, the big mistake a lot of people make is they give too much information. If you're doing like a pitch meeting style thing, that's a little different. But if you're pitching at a comic convention, like I said, a lot of people will just go so much in depth, and it, you know, you're going to need an abbreviated version of your story. But I've been in this situation where either, you know, I'll be at my booth or whatever, and somebody will come up and they're talking about their comic, and it just goes on, and they get all into all the minutia and everything, all the world building, you know, all the techno babble that goes along with their comics, all this stuff that really isn't. I don't want to say it's not relative or it's not relevant to your story, but the thing is, your story, you're attached to your story. You know your story, you know what it's about, you're excited about it, but a lot of that, it's just, you have this intimate familiarity with your story where the average person that's just kind of walking by, they don't know all this and they don't need to know all this. So you've got to bring it down to a very, you know, bite-sized pieces, very concise, very direct, very quick. It's very important to understand that when you are at a comic convention and you're pitching at a comic convention, that you're not trying to tell your story, you're trying to sell your story. So keep that in mind. This is whether you think of it this way or not, it is a product, it is something that you're trying to get people to pick up on, to read, to get into, and a long, lengthy description that goes into all this stuff, you're just going to lose people. So it's got to be quick, and you got to get their attention right away. Now, it's equivalent to if you are like if you're same thing if you're pitching like in Hollywood or whatever. There's the idea of the elevator pitch, and if you're not familiar with what that is, that's the amount of time you have to pitch your story if you're in an elevator with somebody potentially that's like a, you know, that can either you know, make or break you or whatever, or they could take on your idea. You're basically a producer or something like that. If you are in an elevator, and it's not like the Empire State Building, the idea is that, oh, I got from floor 1 and I get to go to the top of the Empire State Building and pitch my comic. No, it's just from one floor to the next. So it's very quick like that. Think of it this way. If you can't sum up what your comic is about in a tweet, at least in these comic conventions, style pitches, not the boardroom type thing, but the comic convention pitch, a real quick elevator type pitch. If you can't sum it up in a tweet, then you're doing it wrong. And when I say you're doing it wrong, I don't want to give the idea that there is one particular way you have to pitch. There's a lot of different styles and ways you can go about pitching, and we'll cover a few of these in this video. But the main thing is keep it short and sweet, because here's the thing. People, you can if you grab their attention, then you can go a little more in depth and you can talk more about the story. But if you don't grab their attention right away, if you're just going on and telling all this other stuff about your comic, and you've already lost them, then you're just babbling on and they're trying to make their escape. The thing is, people can ask to hear more about your story, but they can't really ask to hear less. So, I mean, they can, but by that point, you've already lost them. If they're like, okay, you know, stop, okay, I've heard enough. And people don't want to be rude and everything, but if you, and like I said, I've been in situations where it just goes on and I'm like, okay, I don't really need to know about all this stuff. Get to the point, you know, so definitely keep that in mind. It's like, if there's a set of rules, that's rule number one. And just another thing that I like to do when I'm at a convention and I'm pitching, I like to stand up. I like to be at eye level with somebody. It just makes that connection a little better. And I'm typically not out there like a carnival barker, like, hey, do you like this? This is what my story's about, or whatever. I don't usually do that. Usually as people are coming by, they're browsing. Either if they glance at my comic, they make eye contact with my comic, then I'll go into my pitch. I'll tell them what it's about. If not, if they're just up to the table, I may, or if they look over at the comic, and if they, sometimes people come up and they'll pick it up and flip through it and everything. Not everyone's comfortable doing that. Some people are like, oh, I don't, you know, maybe it's that whole idea of, you know, some stores, they don't want you to flip through stuff. But for me, I definitely encourage people to look through my book and see if it's something they're into. But if they're not, don't be afraid to just take out a copy and just put it in their hands. Put it in their hands, like, if they're interested. If they're not looking at the comic or anything, don't just like, oh, here. I mean, it depends on your technique and everything, but usually I like to know they're somewhat interested, at least from the cover or something like that, and I'll put that in their hands so they know it's okay, that they can flip through it, and I'll say, here, flip through it, and as they're doing that, then I can go into my pitch. So one of the more popular ways to pitch a story is by briefly, and briefly summarizing your story. So for instance, and you can do that by asking questions or answering questions. So for instance, who's this story about? Who's the protagonist? So, and you don't have to, and a lot of people, they'll go into the name of their protagonist. Honestly, it's important to you, but it's really not that important to most people what the name of your protagonist is, because they don't have any form of reference for that. So, for instance, if I was George Lucas pitching Star Wars, I don't necessarily have to say Luke Skywalker, because I mean, it's kind of a cool name, so maybe that does something, but typically you don't need to know the name of the character. It would be it's more effective to like list, you know, a description of that character. So in the case of Luke Skywalker, I don't necessarily have to say Luke Skywalker, but I want to describe him. So, and you can do that using adjectives or improper nouns. So, you know, a starry-eyed farm boy, you know, that kind of gives you expression, it gives you the impression of who this person is. He's got his eyes off on the stars. He doesn't really want to be. He's just a farm boy, but he's got visions of wanting to be more. So that's kind of the way to do it. You don't necessarily have to, I mean, you can say Luke Skywalker, starry-eyed farm boy, but you don't necessarily have to. It's not that important to even mention the names of your character. So you know who your character is all about, but you have to ask some more questions, like, what is it they want? And also, what's standing in their way? What is the conflict there? And how do they resolve that conflict? And you probably don't want to go into spoilers. You don't want to, you know, sum up the whole ending of how everything ends as far as how they defeat the bad guy or whatever the case is, or how they resolve that. But you can even say, you know, will they survive or something like that. Just lead up to that. Give it kind of a question as to, yes, they do need to overcome this, but will they? I don't know. The other thing you want to talk about, you want to mention probably in your pitch, if you're doing one of these story type pitches, is the setting, the time frame, the setting, so people know where they are. What is this? Is this on a distant planet? Is it in the Old West? Is it whatever? Just so you know, people have a frame of reference to where this story takes place, and maybe even mention sort of the genre, if it's a sci-fi or if it's horror or whatever the case is. So for instance, my comic book, Young and the Dead, if I was to give a story pitch for this, I might say a band of neighborhood misfits defend their treehouse against a horde of flesh-eating zombies. So right there, you know who the protagonist is, neighborhood misfits. You have a little bit of, there's a descriptor there. You kind of have an idea where this takes place. If neighborhood, it's probably a suburban style setting. So you've got that. What is the obstacle? What is the goal actually is to to keep their treehouse intact and defend it. And the obstacle is these flesh-eating zombies. So there you've got pretty much everything in, just like I said, a very short, even half a tweet, the original tweets before they added more characters to them. Really quick, really concise, and that lets you know. And then after that, I can go more into it if I want to let people know a little more about it. For instance, it takes place in the 80s, so there's the time frame. There's a lot of nostalgia involved. So that is one approach, the story approach. Very streamlined, very effective. Here's another, and that is kind of comparing it to something that somebody else is already familiar with. Familiarity is a big thing. You always want to you want to tap into things that people understand, that they know about. So for instance, another way I would pitch this is I would say it's like Goonies meets Night of the Living Dead. Two things that people understand, and it's like, oh, okay, I get it. So yeah, you're connecting with the potential audience, the person across from the table, with something that they're already familiar with. So another one might be, here's my comic, Galactic Space Cadets. It is like Harry Potter in space. So you've got the idea, so it's this, and then that's it. And then if somebody's intrigued with that, you can go in a little more in depth, and it's like, this kid gets whisked away from Earth to this intergalactic, space patrol, with all these other aliens and everything, but it's like a school for learning how to be a space pilot or something like that. So very Harry Potter, but in space. So, and people are like, I know Harry Potter, I understand what space is. That's kind of a cool concept. Or if you have a story that maybe you don't know how to sum it up, if you're how do I compare this to something that already exists? Because I came up with this idea because no one else has done it, or that I know of. So, and most everything's been done. But if you do have something that's maybe really original, or something that you just don't know how to compare it, then you can talk about what it's not like. You can say, you've heard this story of this amusement park where these clone dinosaurs come alive and start eating the patrons, or where these animatronic robots wreak havoc throughout the amusement park. But have you heard a story where the amusement park is a gateway to this parallel dimension where the only way to escape is to go through every attraction and either complete these death-defying challenges or something like that? Whatever. This is off the top of my head, so obviously you want to sum that up and make it really, really tight and everything, so you can. But you get the idea. Like, you've heard this and you've heard this, but so you can do that as well if you're doing something a little different. So a lot of times we're pitching things like when I say my comics like Goonies meets Night of the Living Dead, or if I was to say, if you like Goonies, if you like Night of the Living Dead, then you'll probably like my comic. You can also say, like my friend Corey Kerr, he was given a pitch to something that he was working on, and he was saying, well, if you like the government, spying on you and controlling your every move, you're not going to like this, because it's the opposite. It's totally the antithesis of that. So you can kind of flip it too. If you like this, then you're probably not going to like this. So it's a bit of reverse psychology, something that no one really actually likes. Then you'll probably like this. So and it really does come down to just being clever. As comic artists or writers, we are creative people. So it's our job to be creative and do something a little different. So, because the best pitch is going to be something that totally, is something no one's ever heard before. That's really going to be like, wow, I love that. So keep that in mind and just be creative. And with some of these rules, some rules are meant to be broken, but I'm gonna keep restating this over and over again. The making it quick and short and everything, that's one rule that I would suggest that you don't break. Another way you can pitch something is just to ask a question of the audience. For instance, imagine if, and put them in sort of the place of the character. So you're not really saying this is a story about this particular character. You're putting them in that place so they can imagine themselves as the protagonist. So it would be like, imagine if you were marooned on a far off planet, the nearest help is like 2 weeks away and you only have 24 hours worth of oxygen, something like that. And then they're in there, that space of like, oh wow, what would I do? What will this person do in the story? I want to know more about that. So as you can see, there are so many different ways that you can pitch a comic book. What's really important is that you know your pitch back to front, that you can recite it in your sleep at a moment's notice, so you don't even have to think about it. It's just like, boom, this is it, this is it. And so, you know, it's got to be second nature to you. You should practice that pitch, you know, just so it's really no big deal, because I know I've been in so many situations where, oh, what's your comic about? And it's, well, it's kind of like this or it's like that. And no, you want to be like, boom, this is it, this is it, this is it. So know that and practice it till you get it down. I just want to leave you with a few more tips, just little tidbits or whatever that might help you with your pitches and everything. So one of the things that I do is I have a couple alternative pitches. Like I might have a couple different pitches for the same project, and this isn't necessary, but I find that it kind of helps when you are at a comic convention, especially if it's busy, because if one person comes by and then you give your pitch and it's like, oh, this is it, and then the next person comes by and maybe they're watching while the other person is there or overheard it, and you give the exact same pitch. Sometimes it tells you so you're not giving that same pitch over and over again, but a couple different angles on ways to pitch this, just so it sounds a little more natural. So it doesn't, I mean, like I said, you want to know it back and forth, but you don't want to seem like it's back and forth. You want to just seem like you intimately know your story and you can just talk about it any which way, and it's gonna make sense. So if that works for you, that's fine. I mean, you can stick with one pitch. If it's too much to worry about, that's fine. But for me, I find it helps that, you know, I can just kind of casually, you know, pick 2 or 3 different ways of pitching this, and maybe it depends on the person, how, you know, maybe you can kind of size them up and see what they're all about. This pitch might work better for this type of person. You never know. That's one thing that I like to do. So I know this is hard, but it really, you got to be confident with your pitch. So that's why knowing it back and forth is really good. But you know, if you're confident about that, that's what kind of sells it more than anything. I mean, you could probably be super confident with just kind of a basic, you know, story idea, and you might be able to get people more interested in than if you just kind of like, well, it's kind of like, and you could have the greatest concept there is, but if you're not saying it with like gusto and with pride and with, you know, with confidence, then it might not go over as well. Now, another thing you can do, and this is kind of a fun thing that was actually brought up by our guest on the last Artcasters, and what they did is they tabled with another person, and they were talking about how they would pitch each other's books. And I like that idea a lot, because then it doesn't come off as, it's more of an endorsement, really. If you're pitching somebody else's book, because obviously you're going to say the best thing about your own comic. So, but if you have somebody else talking up your comic, that's great. So that's kind of a cool idea. And if I ever do table with somebody else, I'll probably ask them, hey, how about if I pitch your book and you pitch mine? And I just think that's a really cool idea. And it's just like, oh yeah, this guy's not even the writer and he likes it so much. So maybe you should check it out. So another really cool idea. Now, speaking of confidence, there can be overconfidence where it comes off bragging, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to go out there and be like, oh, this is the best sci-fi horror story you're ever gonna read, because first of all, that's not for you to decide. That's for them to decide. And usually that just like, oh, really? And then you set this high expectation and everything. So don't approach it like this is the best. It's kind of like that thing, the best cup of coffee. Who decides what is the best cup of coffee to put that on an advertisement or anything like that? And people are usually skeptical when they hear that. So, don't go that far with it, but you do, the way to be confident, and I had another video where I talked about how to pitch something and be confident with it and not coming off bragging. So the thing you want to keep in mind with that is just be proud of your work. There's nothing wrong. It's okay to be proud of your work, and it's not bragging. It's just like, oh, I think this is really the best thing that I've ever written. And that's your own opinion. So it's not, and you can say that, and it lets the person on the other end of the table know that, hey, this is something I'm really proud of, and there's nothing wrong with that. So Yeah, be proud, be confident, but don't make these outlandish claims like, oh, this is the best thing you'll ever read or ever has been put to comic book form or anything like that. So yeah, those are just some of the tips that I have. There's all kinds of different ways that you can pitch a story, but going back once again, the most important thing is just keep it short, keep it sweet, keep it concise, and know it back and front. You definitely want all that. So again, for my comic book, it is a kids versus zombie adventure set in the 80s. Imagine Goonies meets Night of the Living Dead. That's usually the one that I go with, but I've got other ones, like I said, a group of neighborhood kids defending their treehouse against a horde of flesh-eating zombies, whatever. Like I said, I have a few different pitches, but they're all short, they're all sweet, they're all to the point, and they're all pretty effective. So when I give those pitch, it's like, yeah. If they're into what the book is about, if somebody doesn't like zombies, if somebody doesn't like those type of kid adventure stories, or somebody doesn't like young adult or something like that, then maybe they won't be into it. But if it is something, then you're looking for that audience, somebody that's going to connect with it. And if you got something, if you can get it across really short, really sweet, really effectively, then you've probably made a sale. So anyway, that's all I got to talk about today. Let me know if you have any pitches, or let me know what your pitches are, if they're short enough, or just if you've got any ideas that maybe I didn't even cover, maybe I didn't even think about that. Let me know in the comments section. I will talk to you guys later. That is all. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw and you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Also, you can follow me at Serkworks on social media, and now you can support the work that I do on Patreon. Do you like making comics? Then go to Serkworks.com and pick up the Comic Maker Starter Kit. It's packed full of fonts, brushes, templates, and more. And best of all, it's totally free.